We all agreed. "You're not welcome at your sister's engagement party," my mom proclaimed with a smirk. "Good to know," I responded, transferred the $9,400 honeymoon fund back to my account, and canceled the flights I booked in their name. By morning, I had 19 missed calls and 1 voicemail. I, 27M, always thought I was the reliable one in my family, the older brother who stepped up when things got tough. When my sister announced her engagement 3 months ago, I was genuinely happy for her. She'd been dating this guy for 2 years, and while he wasn't exactly my favorite person, he made her smile. That's all that mattered to me. The engagement party planning started immediately. My sister had always dreamed of a big celebration, and honestly, our parents weren't in the best financial position to make it happen. Dad's construction business had taken a hit during the economic downturn, and Mom's part-time job at the local clinic barely covered their basics. That's when I stepped in. I'd been working overtime for months, picking up extra shifts at the engineering firm where I work, and I'd managed to save up a decent chunk of money. When my sister mentioned how stressed she was about the party costs, I offered to help, not just with decorations or food, but with something bigger. I surprised her by booking flights for her and her fiancé to Hawaii for their honeymoon. The tickets cost me $3,200, and I'd also set aside another $6,200 in a separate account as a honeymoon fund for them. The look on her face when I told her was worth every hour of overtime I'd worked. She actually cried, hugged me tight, and told me I was the best brother in the world. My parents seemed grateful too, though they were quieter about it. Dad just nodded and patted my shoulder, while Mom gave me one of her tight smiles. But something shifted in the weeks leading up to the party. My sister started making comments about how I needed to dress appropriately, how I shouldn't embarrass her in front of her fiancé's family. My parents joined in, suggesting I should maybe tone down my personality, not tell my usual jokes, and basically make myself invisible at the event. I brushed it off initially. Wedding planning is stressful, and people say things they don't mean. But then the real conversations started happening. My sister mentioned that her fiancé's family was quite traditional and conservative, and that my lifestyle might not align with their values. I asked her what she meant by that, and she got evasive, changing the subject quickly. The truth became clearer when I overheard a phone conversation between my parents. They were discussing how to handle me at the engagement party, and Mom was saying something about how I might make things awkward with my attitude and my tendency to speak my mind. Dad agreed, mentioning that maybe it would be better if I kept a low profile. I realized they were embarrassed by me, not because of anything terrible I'd done, but because I didn't fit the image they wanted to project to the future in-laws. I worked in engineering, made good money, lived independently, and had never caused any major family drama. But apparently, my directness and my unwillingness to pretend to be someone I wasn't made me a liability. The final straw came 2 days before the engagement party. I was at my parents' house helping with some last-minute preparations when my sister's fiancé and his parents stopped by. I introduced myself politely, made small talk, and tried to be welcoming. But I noticed the looks they exchanged when I mentioned my job, my apartment, and my hobbies. They seemed to view me with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. After they left, my family gathered in the living room for what felt like an intervention. My sister started by saying that she appreciated everything I'd done for them, but that she needed me to understand how important this engagement party was to her future. My parents nodded along, and then Mom delivered the blow. She told me that they'd all discussed it, and they felt it would be best if I didn't attend the engagement party. She said it with this smirk on her face, like she was enjoying delivering the news. She explained that my presence might create tension, that I didn't really fit in with the kind of crowd they were expecting, and that this was my sister's special day. My sister sat there silently, not contradicting Mom, not defending me, just looking uncomfortable but not saying a word. Dad avoided eye contact entirely. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. These were the people I'd worked extra hours for, the people I'd spent my savings on, the people I'd always supported without question. And they were telling me I wasn't welcome at a family event because I might embarrass them. I kept my voice steady when I responded. I told them that was good to know and that I understood their position perfectly. I said I hoped they had a wonderful party and that I wished my sister all the happiness in the world. Then I went home and got to work. First, I called the airline and canceled the honeymoon flights. Since they were booked in my name and it was still within the cancellation window, I was able to get a full refund. The customer service representative was very helpful, especially when I explained that there had been a change in plans. Next, I transferred the $6,200 honeymoon fund from the joint savings account I'd set up for my sister back to my personal account. It was my money, deposited over several months, and I had every right to move it. I also canceled the hotel reservations I'd made for their honeymoon, getting refunds where possible. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight, but I felt a strange sense of relief. If I wasn't welcome at their celebration, then my financial contributions weren't welcome either. I turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The engagement party was scheduled for Saturday evening. I spent the day doing things I enjoyed, went for a long hike, grabbed lunch at my favorite restaurant, and caught up on some reading. I didn't think about what was happening across town, and I didn't feel sorry for myself. Sunday morning, I turned my phone back on to 19 missed calls and 1 voicemail. The calls were from my sister, my parents, and even my sister's fiancé. The voicemail was from my sister, and her voice was shaky. She told me that they'd discovered the canceled flights and missing honeymoon fund on Friday night, just hours before the party. She said the party had been a disaster because she'd spent the entire evening stressed about the honeymoon situation. She begged me to call her back, saying they needed to talk urgently. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. I made myself breakfast and thought about whether I wanted to engage with this drama at all. The calls kept coming throughout Sunday. I finally answered when my dad called for the 4th time. His voice was different, less authoritative than usual, almost pleading. He asked me to come over so we could discuss things as a family. I told him that I thought we'd already discussed everything we needed to discuss. I reminded him that they'd made their feelings about my place in the family very clear, and that I was simply respecting their wishes. If I wasn't welcome at family events, then my money wasn't welcome either. He tried to argue that those were 2 separate things, that my financial help was appreciated even if my presence was problematic. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. He was essentially saying that they wanted my money, but not me. I told him that was exactly the problem. I explained that I'd realized they viewed me as a wallet with legs, someone who could be called upon to solve financial problems, but then dismissed when it was convenient. I said I was done with that arrangement. Update 1. Monday morning brought a surprise visitor. My sister showed up at my apartment before I left for work. She looked like she hadn't slept, and she immediately launched into an apology. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd let her anxiety about impressing her fiancé's family cloud her judgment. She explained that her fiancé's parents had made some comments about wanting to keep the engagement party intimate and traditional, and that she'd panicked about anything that might rock the boat. She admitted that she'd been the one to suggest I might not fit in, and that our parents had just gone along with her wishes. I asked her why she'd thought I wouldn't fit in. What exactly about me was so embarrassing or inappropriate? She struggled to answer, eventually admitting that there wasn't anything specific. She said she'd just been worried about every little detail and had convinced herself that I might say something that could be misinterpreted. I told her that hurt more than anything. The idea that she viewed me as such a loose cannon that I couldn't be trusted at a family gathering was devastating. I reminded her of all the times I'd been there for her, all the support I'd provided over the years, and asked if she really thought I would sabotage her engagement party. She broke down crying, saying she knew she'd been wrong, that she'd realized at the moment they told me not to come. She said the party had been miserable because all she could think about was how badly they'd treated me. She begged me to give her another chance, to let her make it up to me. I felt bad seeing her so upset, but I also felt like this wasn't just about one decision. This was about a pattern of taking me for granted, of viewing me as someone who would always be there to clean up their messes without expecting anything in return. I told her I needed time to think about it. She asked about the honeymoon fund and flights, and I explained that when someone tells you you're not welcome in their life, it's reasonable to assume they don't want your financial support either. She said she understood, but asked if there was any way to work things out. I told her we'd see. Update 2. Over the next few days, the family pressure campaign intensified. My parents called repeatedly, my sister texted constantly, and even some extended family members reached out to try to mediate. Everyone had an opinion about the situation, and most of them thought I was being too harsh. My aunt, who I'd always been close with, called to tell me that while my feelings were valid, family was family, and that I should find a way to forgive them. She said the engagement party was just one day, but family relationships last forever. I appreciated her concern, but I pointed out that they hadn't just excluded me from one day. They'd fundamentally changed how I understood my place in the family. I discovered that their love and acceptance came with conditions, and that when those conditions weren't met, I could be easily discarded. My cousin, who had always been like a brother to me, took a different approach. He called to tell me that he thought my family had behaved terribly, but that cutting them off completely might be an overreaction. He suggested that I should make them work to earn back my trust rather than shutting them out entirely. His perspective resonated with me more than the others. I started thinking about what it would take for me to feel comfortable with my family again. It wasn't just about apologies. It was about understanding that my worth to them couldn't be contingent on my ability to contribute financially or my willingness to make myself invisible when convenient. Thursday evening, my sister showed up again. This time, she brought her fiancé with her. I was surprised to see him, since we'd never really connected, but I invited them in. Her fiancé apologized immediately. He said my sister had told him everything, and that he felt terrible about his role in what had happened. He explained that his parents had made some comments about keeping the guest list small and traditional, but that he'd never asked for me to be excluded. He said he'd actually been looking forward to getting to know me better, since I was obviously important to my sister. He admitted that he'd been nervous about meeting the family and had probably been overly concerned about making a perfect impression on everyone. I appreciated his apology, and it helped me understand that this situation had been more about my family's insecurities than about any real problem with me. But I still felt like the damage had been done. My sister asked what it would take for me to forgive them. I told her it wasn't about forgiveness, it was about trust. I said I needed to know that they valued me as a person, not just as someone who could solve their problems with money. She promised that things would be different, that she'd learned from this mistake. But I told her that promises weren't enough. I needed to see changes in how they treated me, and that would take time. Update 3. 2 weeks after the engagement party that I didn't attend, my sister called with news. She and her fiancé had decided to postpone their honeymoon indefinitely. She said they wanted to use the time to save up money themselves rather than relying on family members to fund their trip. She also told me that they'd had a serious conversation with both sets of parents about family dynamics and respect. She said they'd made it clear that any future events would include all family members, and that there wouldn't be any more discussions about who did or didn't fit in with their image. I was impressed by this gesture, but I wasn't ready to jump back into the family dynamic immediately. I told her I appreciated the changes she was making, but that I needed to see consistency over time. My parents reached out separately to apologize. Mom's apology was stilted and formal, like she was reading from a script. Dad's was more genuine, and he admitted that they'd handled the situation poorly. He said he'd been thinking about how he would have felt if his siblings had excluded him from a family event, and that he realized they'd been wrong. I accepted their apologies, but maintained my boundaries. I told them I was willing to work on rebuilding our relationship, but that it would have to be different from before. I couldn't go back to being the family bank account who was expected to solve problems without question but could be dismissed when inconvenient. A month later, my sister invited me to a small dinner party at her apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just her fiancé, and me. We cooked together, talked about everything except the engagement party drama, and actually had a good time. Her fiancé made an effort to get to know me, asking about my work and my hobbies. I realized that he was actually a decent guy who had just gotten caught up in family politics and his own nervousness about making a good impression. At the end of the evening, my sister asked if I would be willing to help with wedding planning. Not financially, but just as her brother. She said she wanted me involved in the important decisions and that she valued my opinion. I told her I'd think about it, but I was leaning toward yes. It felt like she was making a genuine effort to include me as a family member rather than just a financial resource. The honeymoon fund and flights remained canceled. I'd moved that money into an investment account for myself, and I felt good about that decision. But I was open to the possibility of contributing to their wedding in some other way, if and when I felt comfortable doing so. 6 months later, our family dynamic had shifted significantly. My parents were more respectful of my boundaries. My sister included me in major decisions, and I developed an actual friendship with her fiancé. The trust was still rebuilding, but it was progress. The most important change was in how I viewed myself within the family. I was no longer the person who said yes to every request and absorbed every slight without complaint. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand better treatment, and surprisingly, my family had risen to meet those expectations. I never did attend an engagement party for my sister, but I was honored to be her man of honor at the wedding. And when it came time for the honeymoon, they'd saved up the money themselves and were proud of their independence. Looking back, getting excluded from that engagement party was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to examine my relationships and demand better from the people who claim to love me. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose something to realize what it's actually worth. The 19 missed calls that morning had been my family realizing they'd made a mistake. But more importantly, they'd been the wake-up call I needed to start treating myself with the respect I deserved.